Well, between the injunction and put against the SAVE Act, we'll talk about that in just a second, as well as the state convention and anything else going on in Indiana politics these days. We're always joined by my favorite sparring partner, Julia Vaughn, Common Cause. Julia, how's it going? I've missed your smiling face and cheerful disposition after all the fun stuff we've been dealing with lately.
Well, I'm doing all right. Nice to be with you, Abdul.
All righty, great. Well, let's talk about the SAVE Act. First of all, explain to our audience what the SAVE Act was before we get into what the judge had to say about it.
Well, the SAVE database, it's different from the SAVE Act, which is that election bill the president's been pushing forever. But the SAVE database is database of non-citizens, but it is certainly not a good database. It's dated, it's unreliable. And so we had a number of states, including Indiana, want to use this unreliable information to ferret out non-citizens who might be registered to vote. This is the big lie that has been going on for years now, that we've got this big problem with ineligible people casting ballots in our elections. It's a lie. Organizations as different as the liberal Brennan Center for Justice and the conservative Cato Institute have both done extensive studies of this and have said it just is incredibly rare. And typically it happens if you find a non-citizen on the voting rolls, they've been misinformed about their eligibility. So there is certainly not a widespread problem, and this is not having any impact on the outcomes of elections. But this is just one of those, issues that is being used for partisan political purposes. And the really sad part is that they've been drumming this up and demonizing immigrants and non-citizen voting for so many years that a large number of the public actually believes it. About 85% of Republicans actually believe this is a problem. But it isn't. You're more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to be charged with the crime of a non-citizen voting in our elections. So, we've had states, including Indiana, clamoring to use this unreliable information to again find these phantom non-citizens on our voting rolls. So
Now,
on Monday, a federal judge said, no, you're not going to do this. This information is unreliable. And the other point is that as they're accumulating all of this information in one data point, they're putting our private information at risk. The voter rolls contain sensitive information about each of us, our full name, our date of birth, our driver's license number, or the last four of our social security number. So the state needs to be protecting that information. And there are federal laws that are very specific about how it can be used and how it can be shared with the federal government. And so the judge finally on Monday said, no, I'm going to put a stop to this because you are really trampling on the rights of people to vote and at the same time putting this sensitive personal information at risk. So we know now that any type of attempt to use the SAVE database to purge voters will be stopped. But of course, we do expect, there will be appeals by the Trump administration to try to continue these efforts, which are, again, a non-issue. It's not a problem. But what it is creating a problem for naturalized citizens who are being misidentified and being forced to provide proof of citizenship.
our guest in the program today is our good friend Julia Vaughn, Indiana Common Cause, talking about the SAVE Act, the judge putting it on hold. I want to say most recent a permanent injunction against the SAVE Act, but we expect that to be appealed. Now, Julia, one of the things that's interesting has been this clamor that non-citizens are voting. But number one, no one could ever point to an actual non-citizen, at least here in the state of Indiana, who actually voted illegally.
Because our laws work. It's illegal four times over. for anyone to attempt to do this. So the fact that they can't find anybody committing these crimes is clear proof that the current system works. You know, you swear under penalty of perjury that you are a citizen when you fill out a voter application, a voter registration application. If anyone violates, if a non-citizen violates this law, they're not only going to be convicted of a very serious crime, they will be deported. So why in the world would anybody put such risk forward to cast one ballot that is more likely than not to have no overall impact on the overall result? So, you know, I used to read a lot of crime, you know, true crime books, and it was always interesting to me about the motive. So any crime has to have a motive. And the motive here just wouldn't make any sense. And so again, you know, it just doesn't happen. Yet Indiana has spent a tremendous amount of time and resources on this snipe hunt. You know, I just recently wrote an op-ed for Indiana Capital Chronicle, and that's the example that I use. This is a snipe hunt. Anybody who's grown up in the Midwest and attended a slumber party or went to summer camp, you participated in a snipe hunt. And you know, that's just it's a, you know, way to trick somebody into believing something that isn't true. And that's what this non-citizen voting hype is. It's a big old snipe hunt.
And I want to say, Julia, if I remember something correctly, I think like maybe in the past 20 years, there maybe been like maybe like five non-citizens voting. I think maybe I think you count them like on one hand if you're missing two fingers.
Yeah, no, again, it is astonishingly small. That's what the Brennan Center characterized it after an extensive study of several decades worth of voting information. And then the Cato Institute was even blunter. They said these claims are just bogus. You know, it doesn't happen. So we have problems with elections in Indiana, but ineligible people participating is not one of them. And so it is just frustrating that our Secretary of State, the legislature, they have spent so much time and energy doing things that only harm naturalized citizens who have become voters, but certainly don't help the rest of us who need election reforms to make voting more accessible.
And I have to say, even the Secretary of State's wife, who was a non-citizen, didn't break the law when she voted because she was properly registered for the most part, give or take.
Well, again, yeah, we don't have widespread evidence that anybody who isn't eligible is casting a ballot, and we have laws in place to deal with it already. So, you know, we and the others who have challenged the documentary proof of citizenship laws here in Indiana that were passed both in 2024 and 2025, first implemented last year. What we predicted would happen is exactly what has happened. They've identified a couple thousand people on a list. The vast majority of them are responding, but there are a group that aren't. We don't know if they even got the notice. And again, it is just a wild goose chase that our energies could be better spent doing other things.
Our guest on the program today is Julia Vaughn. Julia is the head of Indiana Common Cause. Talk about elections and voting and the whole nine yards. Speaking of elections, Julia, both Republicans and Democrats wrapped up their state conventions recently. Republicans this past week dropping Diego Morales for Max England, an aide to former U.S. Senate Senator Jim Banks. Democrats did theirs a couple weeks ago. They picked Bo Bai, the son of Evan Bai, Birch Bai, a famous family name. And then we've got the Libertarian Laura Schillings, and it looks like Greg Ballot will actually have the signatures to get on the ballot. Your thoughts on the upcoming election season?
Well, I'm really excited that we're going to have more choices for Secretary of State, certainly. It's exciting to me that an independent candidate has thrown his hat in the ring. And, it's more significant than Greg Ballard running. It's, if he is able to achieve making the ballot, then that makes it possible for other independent candidates to achieve ballot access and not have to go through the very rigorous signature gathering process that, the Republican and Democrats have put in place to try to keep independent candidates off the ballot. So, that's one of the bad things about Indiana election law. We don't tend to have as many choices as voters. It often comes down to just Republican or Democrats. The Libertarians are able in some areas of our state to field candidates. But, we should have multiple choices on our ballot. And so I'm just excited that it appears we will have more than just the Republican and Democrats to choose from for Secretary of State. And I'm hopeful. It was really frustrating 4 years ago that the Republican candidate, Diego Morales, just refused to have any public appearances at all. He wouldn't debate any of his challengers, just wouldn't go out unscripted at all. So I'm certainly hopeful, given again all of the issues that have come out of the Secretary of State's office over the last 4 years. I'm really hopeful that all of the candidates will be willing to engage in a very public dialogue about what that office needs to do going forward, because it's been a mess the past 4 years, and whoever gets elected has a lot of cleaning up to do.
Greg Ballard in his independent bid basically had to get at least the signatures of 37,000 registered voters here in the state of Indiana. It looks like the mayor will turn in at the very least 60, because obviously you got to have more than just the bare number. Just ask Todd Young from a few years ago. What a difference a couple of votes can possibly make. What do you think about the signature gathering requirement for independent candidates? Is it too burdensome? Is it too much? Obviously, if you're running for the Senate or governor, you got to get 500 signatures per each congressional district. If you're running as independent, you can get them from basically anywhere as long as they're registered voters in the state of Indiana.
It is very burdensome. And, someone like Ballard is able to raise money because he has connections from his tenure as mayor of Indianapolis. And he's able to hire people to get this done. But if you're a grassroots candidate and you were trying to do this with volunteers, well, good luck. That is a really, really high mountain to climb. So, yes, I do think the requirements are too burdensome, and that's why you see very few independent candidates qualify for the ballot. So automatic ballot access, which, you got to give libertarians credit. They've been able to climb that mountain and get there and stay there. Now, I know they're probably worried about the Ballard candidacy knocking them down and losing their automatic ballot access. But again, it's very complicated. There are different tiers for depending on what kind of candidate you are, and that's just not fair. Indiana needs to level the playing field and make it easier again, because that will result in more choices. And, increasingly, Hoosiers are not aligning themselves with either of the two major political parties. More and more people see themselves as independent or libertarian. So they need to have options on the ballot.
And it's funny you bring that up, because I want to say the most recent polling I saw, a majority, not necessarily a majority, but a plurality of Hoosiers, about 41%, consider themselves independent. Republicans were second, Democrats were third. What does that tell you about the political party system here in Indiana?
Well, it's broken. It doesn't appeal to people. And I think it is the intense partisanship that we see. You know, Hoosiers we're middle of the road people. I'm born and raised in this state, grew up in southern Indiana in a time when that was a pretty Democratic area, but my hometown, Madison, has always been pretty balanced between Republicans and Democrats. And, my dad and granddad were in politics. They were Republicans, but they got along, had to get along with their Democratic counterparts. And so I think people really long for a day when Republicans and Democrats work together, where things weren't so nasty and divisive, where we didn't see, incumbent state senators threatened because they wouldn't go along with a Washington directed policy like mid-cycle redistricting, the swatting and death threats. I mean, I think the average Hoosier is absolutely horrified when they see that these kinds of things are happening in our own state. So it's not surprising to me at all that people are turning away from the two dominant political parties and looking for something different.
And as voters look for something different, sort of a new type of attitude, a return to civility. Like I said, the Lugar Republican and the Evan Bayh type Democrat. Um, do you think that's possible?
It's going to be tough given the, prevalence of social media, the way people are getting their media from very different sources. I mean, depending on whether you tune into MSNBC or Fox News, you could think you're living in entirely different countries. So it is going to take, I think, a strong leader, somebody who is willing to rise above the partisanship and can really, appeal and speak to all Americans. And certainly, I don't think that person has been identified yet, but the person we have in charge in the White House right now is, I think, exactly not the kind of leader that we need to bring us back to a day when opposing political parties could not only talk to each other, but actually work to solve the problems that our country has. I think too many Americans recognize that it's not really about solving problems, it's about scoring political points. I mean, the perfect example is yesterday when this bipartisan housing bill that's been in the works for, a long time, people have worked really hard on this, gets completely upended because the president doesn't get his voter suppression bill. So, we've got definitely the wrong person in charge at the highest office in our country.
And I don't think what the president's staff realized that the president signed doesn't mean the bill doesn't go into law. It goes into effect regardless. Just a little constitutional thing. Our guest on the program, hey folks, I'm sorry, but that's what the rules are. Our guest on the program today is Julia Vaughn. Julia is with Common Cause Indiana. So we're talking about the state of Indiana politics. Republicans, Democrats had their conventions in the past couple weeks. They nominated their candidates for Secretary of State, for auditor, and for treasurer. Also, we have the SAVE Act being put on hold, a permanent injunction issued by a federal judge. I want to say out in the Baltimore type area. Julia, I want to change gears a little bit and talk about sort of not so much the state of our politics, but this sort of return to civility. That it seems that for the longest amount of time we've had this sort of rancor, and things had to basically hit rock bottom before they can go back up again. So let me ask you, in your assessment of Indiana politics for the past 30-something odd years, have we hit rock bottom yet, or are we still a little bit further to go before we start to climb out of this, whatever this political cesspool is?
Well, I was hopeful when the Senate Republicans rejected mid-cycle redistricting. I mean, that was very much obviously a selfless move politically. And clearly, I was disappointed when they were rewarded by most of them not getting elected during the Republican primary. So, that's pretty low. When people who act as statesmen are not rewarded for acting like that, then, then I'm reminded that the people who made those voting decisions are the most partisan of partisans. And so, their judgment is guided by different things than mine. So,
Speaking of, go ahead.
I'm still hopeful. I mean, I believe that again, leadership is so important. It's going to be interesting to see if the president pro tem in the Indiana Senate remains. next session. I believe that, he will probably be challenged, and so that will have a huge impact on the direction that that institution heads. Again, I have been around a long time, and traditionally, the Senate has been that steadying body, and the House has been more maverick. And I think that's been a good, particularly when you have a super majority, it is important to have some tension between those two bodies. Perhaps if, as most folks are predicting, the midterms will be a year that's not good for the party in power, just breaking the supermajority in the House, I think would be helpful in terms of, again, bringing more civility back. When you've got such a huge supermajority, they can run roughshod over everything. So I think, again, if we had more balance, I think balance automatically brings people to better behavior because it's more likely that, your bad behavior will be called out. So, I remain hopeful that maybe we've hit bottom and we can start climbing back to the Indiana that, I first remember when I got involved to this. But, I go back to the days when the Indiana Senate was 26 Republicans to 24 Democrats. So that was a really long time ago, but that was a really good way to get into the process, to see people really had to debate issues on the floor. You know, Conversations didn't happen behind closed door in caucus. They had to actually operate in a transparent manner. And people didn't always toe the party line. So, I remember in Indiana, and we had a close Senate, and then the Indiana House used to go back and forth. Usually it was Republican, but Democrats often would, once in 10 years, maybe win the majority. So those were, I think, the good old days because there was actual competition. I think you had better quality lawmakers elected because competition always makes things better, in my opinion.
Jude, you bring up an interesting point too, particularly on the whole Indiana primary system, because there's talk about at the Republican State Convention closing primaries. So, like, how do you close a primary? And if you're a Republican, you vote a Republican primary, Democrat, you vote a Democratic primary. But how do you get people to vote as Republicans, Democrats, without having to basically cost millions of dollars and be registering everybody and his mother?
Right. And as we said, again, a growing number of Hoosiers don't consider themselves a Republican or a Democrat. So you're going to make these even more exclusive affairs than they are already. And in gerrymandered districts, these are the important elections. And most of our state legislative districts and congressional districts are gerrymandered. So you are going to allow an even smaller portion of the electorate to make these important decisions that impact all Hoosiers. And yet, these two parties want all taxpayers to pay for it. So if you want to close primaries, it's a bad idea. It's, again, leaving important decisions to a really small group of people. I don't think that's ever a good idea. But, please figure out how to pay for it. Because this taxpayer doesn't believe that the state of Indiana needs to pay for the organizational affairs of private organizations. And that's exactly what the Republicans and Democrats are. So Hoosiers aren't under any obligation. If they want to privatize primaries, then they should figure out how to foot the bill for it. And I
And
have
also,
yet to see anybody propose that.
maintain if you're going to have the taxpayers foot the bill, and Julia Vaughn with us for a few more minutes on the program today, you want the taxpayers foot the bill, okay, fine. Then I want an open primary.
Right.
The whoever the DRLI, anarchist candidates on the ballot, the top two vote getters face each other in runoff. Unless you get 60% of the vote, then you're considered the winner. Or am I just crazy? I probably
Well,
am,
now,
but
I don't know. That kind of sounds like ranked choice voting to me. And, that was banned by the General Assembly this year. So.
yeah. But at the same time, though, even with ranked choice voting, which I understand it can get a little complicated from time to time. Here we just say, hey, the top two vote getters, they face each other in a runoff. Unless you get like 60% of the vote, then you automatically win. If you want the taxpayers to foot the bill, otherwise, go close the primary, go have a convention, and DYDM, do it your damn self.
Yes, right. Yeah.
But that's just me thinking out loud. Julia Vaughn with us for a few minutes on the program today. Julia, as we get ready to wind up our conversation here, your thoughts on just generally speaking, the state of Indiana politics, the removal of Diego Morales, when things finally got when things got a little bit too warm in the kitchen for Republicans, Democrats, and the attacks against Bo Bai, the whole nine yards. Have we lost our natural minds yet?
Well, we're headed that direction. I mean, it's already been incredibly entertaining with the whole throwing Diego overboard for very early in the summer. So I just can hardly wait until the real campaign season starts, after Labor Day. But, no, it's, usually the Secretary of State race is pretty much a snoozer, but I don't think we're going to get that this year. Clearly, Bo is going to be able to tap into some big money. He already has. I'm not so sure the Bai name carries as much weight as it did, but money certainly helps. And so he's got a lot of momentum. And again, the Ballard candidacy really throws an interesting wrench into the whole thing. And so again, I'm just hoping, I know that, organizations I work with are going to want to sponsor debates. And so I certainly hope that all of the candidates are willing to stand on a stage together and answer questions about how do we get Indiana out of the basement in terms of voter turnout. And, clearly I don't think closing primaries is one of the ways to do that. But yeah, it's going to be a really interesting election season. And, I'm hopeful. I certainly get a sense that Hoosiers are more interested in ever than participating. So we just want to make sure we are on guard for things like, last minute purges. I mean, that's, part of the fear surrounding the use of the SAVE database is that they would start purging people. So we're getting to the point where, it is clearly illegal under federal law to do any purging 90 days before the election. So we're going to have to keep close eyes out for just tricks, dirty tricks. We know that this administration, if they think they're going to lose, then they will try to cheat. And so it's never been more important to really be wary about voting. Check your voter registration. I've heard too many crazy stories about longtime voters who suddenly are missing from the voting rolls. So Common Cause Indiana and our allies are certainly working, in courts and advocating, but individuals are just going to need to stay aware during this election season because it's going to be crazy.
All right, well, strap yourselves in, folks. It's going to be a bumpy flight. Julia Vaughn, Common Cause. Julia, thank you very much for being with us. Always good to chat with you.
Thanks, Abdul.